Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Annie McCain. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Center for Economic Growth. 3 years ago, policymakers and the governor passed unprecedented and unaffordable tax cuts. No other state has ever tried the Kansas-style experiment, and for good reason. It's been proven time and time again that the path elected officials have chosen for Kansas with these ill-advised tax cuts lead to slower job growth, damaging budget cuts, and record revenue loss. We're here today calling on policymakers and the governor to acknowledge that the adrenaline shot isn't coming and time's up on the tax cuts. We're going to hear from leaders who represent the Kansans that are bearing the burden of this unprecedented and unaffordable tax policy. First, Dwayne Gosen, longtime former state budget director and former member of the Kansas House of Representatives, current senior fellow at the Kansas Center for Economic Growth, will talk about the state's budget crisis and how we got here. Dwayne's then going to be followed by representatives from 8 groups who are going to talk about what's at stake for Kansas.
Good morning. Kansas is experiencing a financial and budget crisis that directly results from unaffordable tax cuts that were passed in 2012 and 2013. Kansas does not have nearly enough revenue to cover normal, reasonable expenses. Expenses are up here and rising. Revenue is down here and falling. In fiscal year 2014, the last fiscal year, the first year that the tax cuts were in full force, revenue fell $700 million from the year before. That drop is not temporary. We are now 9 months into fiscal year 2015, and revenue is continuing to drop. Again, last year, in 2014, revenue fell $700 million, and now revenue is coming in $55 million below that level. More tax cuts are scheduled to kick in next year and each year after. Without a policy change, revenue is not going to grow. The Senate has just passed a general fund budget that spends $6.4 billion, more than that actually. Even though that budget puts schools into a block grant situation, even though that budget concentrates on program cuts, the expenses that are included in the budget still are more than $600 million above expected revenue. So the situation that we have, we've got this Senate budget with conservative expenses at over $6.4 billion, and they're growing. And we've got revenue around $5.8 billion and falling. That gap cannot persist. The state's bank account has already been used up to cover the difference between expenses and revenue. For next year, for fiscal year 2016, lawmakers are already planning to cover part of that gap between revenue and expenses by transferring money from the highway fund and from other funds. But those transfers do not fill the whole gap, and those transfers are only a short-term solution. Kansas has a long-term problem. Kansas needs ongoing revenue, enough ongoing revenue to cover expenses. That's a pretty simple concept. Enough ongoing revenue to cover expenses. Kansas cannot be financially healthy without new revenue. And Kansas cannot protect its investments in education and in other vital programs without new revenue. The problem we have, that big gap between expenses and revenue, has been caused by steep and dramatic income tax cuts. That's the place to look to make a correction.
I'm Shannon Katsaradas, President and CEO at Kansas Action for Children. It's been 3 years since Kansas enacted some of the biggest tax cuts in its history. Since then, state legislators have had their work cut out for them trying to balance the budget. Unfortunately for Kansas children, there will be no do-overs if policymakers don't resolve the fiscal crisis our state is facing. According to Governor Brownback, it requires the courage to face our challenges head-on and find solutions that work for Kansans. I couldn't agree more, and I hope that policymakers will have the courage to acknowledge that the great experiment hasn't produced the desired results. Today's young children cannot afford to have inadequate revenue. A healthy state budget ensures that Kansas kids receive high-quality educational experiences beginning in the early years and have access to health care and other economic supports. The governor has also said Kansans are sensible, decent, compassionate, thoughtful people. I'm a native Kansan, and his words resonated with me. I simply don't believe that Kansans want tax policies that short-circuit investments in the next generation. Compassion for our state's children, particularly our youngest children and our children growing up in the poorest families, means policymakers have to take a hard look at what the march to zero is really costing us. There's no time of greater need than childhood. It is a once-in-a-lifetime window of opportunity. Reversing the tax cuts and restoring revenue is a chance to put the building blocks in place that will allow children to maximize their potential. Let's not just hope that legislators do the right thing for our children. Together, let's call on our policymakers to demonstrate their courage, compassion, and their wisdom in the choices that they make. Let's reverse course before it's too late for an entire generation of Kansas children.
Good morning. I'm Patrice Bangert, and today I'm representing the Protect the Kansas Refundable Earned Income Tax Coalition. When you get as old as I am, one gets to reminisce, so please indulge me. I think that I am a minority in this state house, having been in the Capitol halls in 1998, when the legislators passed the Kansas Refundable Earned Income Tax Credit. One of the inspirations for this policy came from President Ronald Reagan, who called the Earned Income Credit the best anti-poverty, best pro-family, best job creation measure to come out of Congress. I know I have heard all these priorities for Kansas families spoken by Governor Brownback. I agree with him. We want policy in Kansas to support our families. The EITC policy was only one part of a much larger tax package, a package hailed as the largest tax reduction in state history. Governor Graves took pride in touting the bill's inherent fairness. There's a little bit in it for everyone, he said. The $252 million bill was an across-the-board slashing of property, income, inheritance, low-income sales, and business tax. The refundable earned income credit was the tax relief package's component for low-income working families. Most of us have not experienced that same fairness in the tax policy passed in 2012. Instead, the sharp decline of revenue from the income tax cuts has placed in jeopardy programs that help support and build up Kansas children and families. And the programs are placed in a false competition with each other. The refundable earned income credit, or take people off of the disabilities waiting list, early childhood programs, or K-12, etc. During the last years of his life, I had a treasured relationship with the internationally renowned Topeka, Dr. Carl Menninger. I think of him often. I remember a panel he put together at Washburn one January at the beginning of the legislative session, to which he invited legislative leaders. Programs for children were being cut. I am willing to pay more taxes to keep these programs, he said. Who in this audience is willing to pay more taxes? He asked. And then there was the blustery cold winter day when children's groups were gathered on the south side of the Capitol here, raising our voices for children. And there was Dr. Carl, in his 90s, with his cape. And I share Pope Francis's take on politicians. I ask God to give us more politicians capable of sincere and effective dialogue aimed at healing the deepest roots and not simply the appearances of the evils in our world. Politics, though often denigrated, remains a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity inasmuch as it seeks the common good. So let us embrace together our role in the political process, convincing Governor Brownback and the legislators of the truth that for the common good, we need more revenue.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Steffen, and I'm a member of the leadership team of Women for Kansas. And I thank those of you who have t-shirts identical to mine. Women for Kansas is a group of more than 2,000 nonpartisan women across the state who came together in 2014 with the goal of defeating Brownback and putting an end to the crippling destruction of his tax cuts. While we didn't get it done, we have not disbanded and we're not defeated. Through the 2016 election, we'll be increasing our membership and targeting the legislative lemmings who share equally in Brownback's budget butchery. The Women for Kansas are sick at heart, ashamed to live in a state that cares so little about its citizens' wants and needs. From education to healthcare, highways to the highway patrol, state parks to the decimated budget surplus, there is scant evidence that anyone in Topeka listens to us or cares about anyone other than big bucks donors and lobbyists. The Women for Kansas are embarrassed about the continuing negative national publicity and the damaging effect it has and will continue to have on our state as a desirable place to live. Just a couple of weeks ago, USA Today reaffirmed that Kansas badly lags behind the nation in private sector job growth. While jobs in the rest of the country have grown 5%, Kansas jobs have grown a paltry 3%. My daughter's friend perfectly exemplifies why the growth we were promised is eluding us. My friend has been a doctor for 30 years. Her daughter, born, raised, and schooled in Wichita, followed in her mother's footsteps, and she's in medical school. Upon graduation, she planned to live and practice in the state she's called home. Now, however, given the dire state of the budget, the many, many backward steps it's forced on us for years into the future, my friend's daughter has no intention of living in Kansas. She will live and practice and, yes, pay her taxes to a state that believes in progress, invest in education, its children, its employees, its infrastructure, the arts, and doesn't turn its back on the sick, the handicapped, and the elderly. My friend's daughter is one of untold numbers who will bypass Kansas as the place they want to live and work and spend their lives. Who, after all, would want to live in a state that's become defined by what it lacks? If you could start over, would you choose to live in Kansas?
Well, hello, first of all, I'm Cheryl Spalding, president of the Mainstream Coalition. Mainstream Coalition is an education and advocacy organization for moderate values in Kansas and includes Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. As such, we're concerned with a wide variety of issues like education, the disabled, the elderly, and the people who take care of these people. We're proud to stand with these other organizations and say to the government leadership, you can't divide us. You can't say to us that if we help one group, it must be at the expense of another, or even worse, because of another group. The thousands of Kansas voters we represent know that it's the legislature who made the mistake when they gave away income tax to 333,000 Kansans with no guarantee of increased jobs, with no guarantee of increased revenue from that favored group. That's just poor legislation, and they must fix it. They need to restore revenue. These reckless revenue policies have left no Kansan unaffected. If you are concerned about your public schools, you should know that if revenue had kept up with personal income the last 3 years, schools could be fully funded. Are you concerned about the long-term fiscal health of the state? Do you know that a legislative committee recently agreed to a massive debt load, $1.5 billion with a B dollars worth of papers, bonds, when they should instead fix the problem of their own making? I truly believe that many of our legislators are appalled at what is happening, and that many brave souls have already said that all solutions must be on the table, and have even suggested that raising revenue must be considered. Better yet, there are those who have suggested we need to walk back on some of those revenue cuts, and we applaud those legislators who dare to speak the truth. Without that, we have heard it will still all turn out all right, but how? On the backs of the middle class? With regressive sales tax and sin taxes and property taxes, none of which are projected to actually close the budget gap? The answer really is simple. Restore the revenue that was lost. Lowering taxes on the upper income earners has not produced a shot of adrenaline to the Kansas economy, but mired the state in stagnant growth. This is not good government. This is policy for the benefit of the few at the behest of special interests, and this crisis has been self-inflicted, and those who created it should fix it. The Mainstream Coalition, The Mainstream Coalition stands with all of these organizations who are here today and sending them this message. Restore the revenue.
Good morning. I'm Mark Barr, a high school science teacher from the Nickerson South Hutchinson School District, currently serving as the Kansas KNEA president. Our Kansas communities are at a crossroads. Kansas is experiencing a serious revenue crisis. crisis of its own making, crisis that is not necessary. We continue to face the impact of the governor's decision to provide tax relief to the wealthiest Kansans while increasing the taxes on the poorest. We have experienced months of declining revenue. Our budget is not balanced, and today's budget gap is expected to grow larger year by year. Yet the cost of education, healthcare, social services, and infrastructure have all dramatically increased, along with the expectations that these core services continually improve. Meanwhile, growth in child and family poverty is growing steadily. Up to this point, the legislature and governor have tried to cut their way out of this crisis. The cuts are causing serious harm to the quality of life that Kansans expect and that businesses expect when making decisions where to locate and attract highly educated, highly skilled workers. If we don't reverse the revenue decline, Kansas communities will be unable to deal with the long-term decline in our children's educational opportunities, in our infrastructure, and in providing care for our most vulnerable citizens. Kansas is indeed at a crossroads. We can continue on a path of decline, or we can take action and move back onto a path that honors the citizens of the state of Kansas. First, we must agree to end the governor's failed experiment. When one is in a hole, one is advised to stop digging. Yesterday, we just added $11 million to that hole. So the legislature must stop digging the revenue hole. Secondly, the legislature must take actions to bring tax exemptions under control. The rapid expansion of exemptions offers a clear example of a tax policy that does not work. Finally, we must all call on our representatives to end the political games geared towards serving special interests at the expense of our future. At the expense of our future and the students of today who will build that future. These extraordinary times calls for extraordinary courage. We have worked too hard and too long in every Kansas community to sit back and watch this happen. We must stand together and insist that our lawmakers accept the responsibility to support Kansans who are suffering from the effects of reckless policy. I'm asking all Kansans to join us and speak up, to save Kansas for the future of our children and our grandchildren, in ways that resemble the state we're proud to call home. Our students only get one chance at first grade. We must provide the resources necessary for all students to succeed. We must adequately fund our schools.
How many of you this morning woke up and saw the headline, "The governor admits his experiment has failed"? Did you see? It was under the dateline, April Fool's Day. Good morning. I'm Vicki Buning with the Kansas Citizens for the Arts and past member of the Kansas Arts Commission. The Kansas Arts Commission was an early casualty of Governor Brownback's misguided, short-sighted policies. He needlessly defunded a remarkably effective Kansas Arts Commission that improved the quality of life in both rural and urban communities across our state. It supported organizations and an industry that created over 4,600 jobs and generated $9 million in tax revenues. The governor defended his actions, saying he was being fiscally responsible. This was an agency that cost the taxpayers an unbelievably low 29 cents per year. speculated that other states would soon follow his lead. That has not happened. In fact, we have seen other states fuel their economies by increased funding to the arts. Our historic capital provides a dramatic backdrop for our call to action today. Just look around you. Sometimes it's important to look back to move forward. And I think here in this building, everywhere we look, we are reminded of the values of past generations and the courageous individuals who stood firm against injustice. It affirms that we are a place that nurtures leaders, as evidenced by these figures around us today. Innovators, adventurers, artists, and so much more. Today, we were asked to answer the question, what is at risk with the governor's policies? The Citizens for the Arts say, we are at risk. Our lives and the quality of our lives are at risk. It is time, Governor, to repeal the 2012 income tax policies. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. My name is Bernie Cook, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Economic Progress Council. I live in Wichita. My last name is spelled K-O-C-H, but I am not related to you-know-who. Thinking about changing my name to Warren Buffett. What grows the economy? I'm here to tell you that there's no magic bullet, as many have claimed. You know, Easter's coming up, and my mother used to tell me, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Well, in Kansas, we have put all of our eggs in one basket, the income tax cuts. And there's little evidence that it's working. A lot of stories, there's a lot of anecdotal kinds of things going around, but our economic growth in this state is not anything beyond what is normal. The latest Kansas Department of Labor report shows non-farm jobs grew only 1.5% in the year-long period ending February of 2015. It's close to or below most of the states in our region. But the differences within Kansas are very striking. The administration likes to point to the Kansas City area, and the Kansas City metro area has had good economic growth. They've got about 3% employment growth over the last year. But the income tax cuts were supposed to help all of the state. I'm from Wichita. That Labor Department report shows a very weak 0.4% employment growth in the Wichita region. Manufacturing actually declined in jobs, and manufacturing is the lifeblood of our region. Respected economists around the world know what's important to grow the economy. Economic freedom, and that certainly includes keeping an eye on taxes and regulations. But we can't put all of our eggs into that one basket. We must have reliable legal systems, and it takes tax dollars to fund those. We must have government infrastructure, roads, bridges, sewers, water systems, and we've taken hundreds of billions of dollars from our transportation plans. We must have technical innovation and improvement, taking the research of our state universities and applying it to business. And probably most important, we must have an educated workforce. While other states are investing in higher education and K through 12, coming out of the recession, we're flat or actually less than we have been. The Kansas income tax changes went too far and will continue to impact the ability of governments at the state and local level to provide the essential services to economic expansion. So in addition to everything else that you've heard from those previous speakers, this is an economic issue. Stability and viability of public services are necessary to the functioning of the economy and society. To their credit, there are legislators and to some extent the governor himself, who want to revisit those income tax cuts. We agree that they should, and we encourage them to do so. Thank you.
My name is Gary Brunk. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Association of Community Action Programs. And I'm here representing RevUp Kansas, whose 37 member organizations are committed to restoring revenues by repealing the tax cuts. We've heard from Dwayne the facts about our crisis. From other speakers, we've heard what's at stake for families, children, education, the arts, our economy, and more broadly, the quality of life in our state. Now, let's spend a minute talking about leadership. On the wall of the public entrance to the Capitol, that magnificent entrance, there's a quote from President Dwight D. Eisenhower that gets at the essence of the kind of leader that he was and the kind of leadership we need today. The quote is, "The opportunist thinks of me and today. The statesman thinks of us and tomorrow." Today, we need leaders who will think of us and tomorrow. Thinking of us means to focus on the common good, a central concept in every major religious tradition, and as Sister Therese referred to, a central concept in Catholic social teaching. Thinking of tomorrow means to focus on how what we do today makes things better for tomorrow for all of us. President Eisenhower believed that a major purpose of government is to make investments that will increase the common good. And during his presidency, the nation experienced steady growth, low unemployment, and a rising middle-class standard of living. That experience stands in stark contrast to the reality today. During the Great Recession, unemployment and wage stagnation dealt a crushing blow to the American middle class. Today, more than 5 years after the supposed end of the recession, the recovery continues to bypass a very large number of Kansans, despite employment, are still poor. And just a little side, in hearings in this legislature, there's a lot of sense that if you're poor, it's because you don't want to work. But the fact is, many working people in Kansas are poor, and they still are working. This is a reality that will not change until we face the fact that too many jobs in Kansas do not pay enough to allow families even a very modest lifestyle. With Kansas policymakers stay the course, this does not have to change in the future. Among the 10 occupations that the Kansas Department of Labor projects will have the largest numerical growth by 2022, 7 typically require mostly high school education for an entry-level position. That is, these are jobs that pay very low wages. These are the growing jobs in our state. This is not inevitable. Government can play an important role by partnering with business, planning for the future, making investments in education, infrastructure, research, and the health of our population. That is how the government supported the creation of the great American middle class in the 50s and 60s, and how it can do so again. But to do so, we need leaders who will work for fair, progressive taxation that allows us to pay for those essential investments. We call on the governor and legislatures to repeal the tax cuts so we can get back to building an economy that works for everyone. An economy where the roadmap to opportunity in the middle class is available to all. Thank you for being here today, and to the press, if you want to speak with any of the speakers, they'll be available after the conference. Thanks a lot for being here.